Hello and good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Wherever you are, I would like to welcome you all to our event. I'm Reinhard Huss from UBI Lab Leeds, and I would like to welcome you to our online discussion about basic income for the arts in Ireland. What have we learned after 8 months with the 3 Irish artists, Alisha, Doody, Shane Finan and Tadhg. I would like to remind, first of all, everybody that we provide a respectful space where critical and civil questions are encouraged, but we will not tolerate any disrespectful comments. So please consider this. I hope it will not be a problem. We have a chat section for comments and questions, and I would like to ask everybody, if you have got questions, to put a Q or question in front of your question, so it makes it easier for the moderator to find these questions, and they can then be sort of used in the chat for our discussion. I would also like to inform you, as you probably have already noted, that our event will be recorded and published online at UBI Lab Arts YouTube channel for further use. So in case you have any concerns about the recording, please raise them now or send me an email. You can find my email address in the chat. I will put it there in a few minutes. Or no, let me put it now so that you can sort of see it. Okay. So the organizers of this event are the UBI Lab Arts, UBI Lab Network, Basic Income Ireland, Culture Declares Emergency, and UBI Lab Leeds. And you will find information about these groups in the chat if you would like to find out more about them. UBI Lab Leeds and UBI Lab Network are sort of part of a wider group, International UBI Lab Network. And I'm the coordinator, I'm Reinhard Huss, and I'm coordinating the UBI Lab Leeds, which is part of this international network. And I would like to thank especially the UBI Lab Network for the financial, technical, and organizational support of our event tonight. Our common goal of the network is the advocacy and achievement of a basic income for everybody. Therefore, we call it universal basic income. Our reasons to advocate for universal basic income: we experience an apocalypse of polycrisis on our planet Earth at the moment. And apocalypse means in the Greek language, revelation. Our revelation is about an economic and political system which is failing most people, and above all, young and future generations, and the self-employed, including artists. What has this revelation to do with basic income? In our opinion, system failure requires system change. The introduction of a basic income in society is part of a system change. And basic income can help to address many challenges in our world, such as the economic and ecological crisis we are all facing at the moment. Sandhya Anattarahman has created the phrase, basic income doesn't solve every problem, but it makes every problem easier to solve. And that is exactly our thinking, our approach. Often basic income is sort of criticized that it wants to solve everything, but it, as this phrase says, it allows every problem to be addressed and be part of the solution. And money is power in our society. So universal basic income would mean money for everybody, and therefore a redistribution of power in our societies. We think that the basic income for the arts pilot scheme in Ireland is an important step in the right political direction. Therefore, UBI Lab Arts, Basic Income Ireland, UBI Lab Network, UBI Lab Leeds, and Culture Declares Emergency are very happy to host this second event, Basic Income for the Arts in Ireland. What have we learned after 8 months of this pilot? I will now briefly introduce the concept of basic income, the strengths and limitations of trials and pilot schemes, and this will be followed by Anne Ryan from Basic Income Ireland, who will explain the context, the Irish context, and then we will hand over to Andy and Toby from the UBI Lab Arts for the discussion. So for some of you who have participated in the first event, This may be a repetition, but I still assume it's good to repeat the concept of basic income as defined by the Basic Income Earth Network, BN, which you also can find the link in the chat. First of all, basic income is a periodic payment, so it's paid at regular intervals, for example, every month, and it's not a one-off grant. It's a cash payment. It's paid in an appropriate medium of exchange, allowing those who receive it to decide what to spend it on. It's not therefore paid either in kind, such as food or services, or in vouchers dedicated to a specific use. Moreover, it's an individual payment, so it's paid on an individual basis and not, for instance, to households, which makes a big difference, and to our actual social security system, where it's often given to the household, and then the power differential in households may mean that not everybody in the household has the same access to the support. This is different with the basic income, which is given to every individual. It's also universal. That's the idea. It's paid to all without means test. So the basic income trial in Ireland is a basic income trial. It's not a universal basic income trial because it's not at the moment paid to everybody. But the idea is to, in the end, it should be given to everybody. And it's unconditional. It's paid without requirement to work or to demonstrate willingness to work. Other important factors of basic income are the financing of the basic income through, for instance, levies on the use of different commons, such as the commons of the sea or the legal commons, so that this sort of use of the commons benefits everybody, or it can be paid through different taxes, closure of tax havens, closure of tax loopholes, and tax exemptions. But that is a huge topic in itself and not part of our discussion tonight, but it's an important point to understand. And also the implementation of a basic income scheme could be either done through the state, municipalities, or in an independent commons wealth fund. Again, it's a huge topic, but it's important to know about it. It will not be part of our discussion tonight. Now, what are the strengths and limitations of basic income pilots and trials? First, I will just mention a few important strengths. Trials and pilots generate publicity and awareness among people about basic income. For instance, this week, there was an announcement of a first small trial with 30 people in 2 places in England. And this announcement of a small trial in England pushed the topic into the TV news of Channel 4 and also in several sort of discussions on TV and several newspapers. Similarly, the basic income pilot with artists in Ireland raises awareness about basic income around the world and informs people in the art sector about basic income. And artists can play a very important role in societies to spread the concept of basic income and mobilize people in favor of basic income. However, there are also limitations of such pilots and trials. Many trials have a small number of participants, such as the one in England, and can only generate some limited qualitative and quantitative evidence about the effects of basic income. This small number is often due to the very limited finance available for such basic income studies. However, even big trials, such as the one in Finland with 2,000 participants in 2017 and 18, are critiqued by opponents of basic income that the positive evidence is insufficient or not as strong enough to be convincing. First, this is due to the fact that all basic income trials have certain obvious limitations, and some aspects of basic income, such as universality, as I mentioned, permanence of payment and financing of basic income cannot really be tested in a trial or a pilot. Second, the same results of a trial are often interpreted in different ways and are unlikely to convince political opponents of universal basic income. This brings me to the most important third point. We live in an age, in my assessment, of an ideology-based policymaking and ideology-based evidence-making, especially when it comes to major policy changes such as universal basic income. This is contrary to the widespread contemporary talk about evidence-informed policymaking. Examples from the UK are the privatization of rail or privatization of water. In the UK, there is no evidence that it's superior to public services. I always, when I was working at the university, asked students, and I also would ask you, I provide you £50 if you can provide me with evidence that this is superior. These things are done based on ideology. Or the climate crisis at the moment, there has been strong evidence for the last 30 years, but no decisive action was taken by policymakers. So we have also strong evidence about the disastrous effects of poverty, inequality, and precarity on mental, social, and physical health, but no decisive action has been taken on these issues up to now. That's why we are fighting for basic income. And therefore, the Irish pilot study with artists is important to mobilize people in favor of a universal basic income as a new social contract and a foundation for a good life for everybody in society. This is the end of my sort of introduction, and I pass now on to Anne Ryan from Basic Income Ireland, who will inform you about the specific Irish context of this pilot. Thank you, and I hope you all have a good evening and enjoy our discussion. Over to you, Anne, please.
Thank you, Reinhard. Hello, everybody. I'm Anne Ryan. I'm a member of Basic Income Ireland and have served on the steering group there for a number of years. And our group has been going for about 12 years now, but there has been a movement for basic income in Ireland for over 40 years. And I see that Sean Healy, one of those people who's steadily advocated it, is here tonight from Social Justice Ireland. I've no doubt he'll have contributions to make later. And just thanks to our co-organisers for including us and for taking the initiative of organising the earlier gathering in June to discuss the pilot. So, I mean, we know that there have been over 150 pilots over the world. And as Reinhard says, none of them is actually a pilot of a proper basic income because they're all time limited or they have other limitations. So in Basic Income Ireland, we take the view that the time for pilots is over and that we just need the universal schemes now. But of course, the pilots do give us an opportunity to talk, to converse, to spark the imagination and hopefully to educate people, because a lot of people in society at large really don't actually know what a basic income is. Even many politicians seem not to know. You know, they confuse it with the minimum wage or the living wage or something like that. And very often too, when people do understand it, when it's explained to them, they think, oh, that's a wonderful idea, but we could never afford it. So there's that response, or there might be a very strong ideological response in opposition to basic income. So we need to have these conversations. But the advantage of a universal scheme, of course, is that everybody is the same. Everybody knows what everybody else is getting. There's no secrecy. There's no sort of embarrassment that maybe I'm getting it and my neighbor isn't. Everyone in my household, in my community would be getting it if it was a universal scheme. So I'm just going to whiz through very quickly some of the political context here. Obviously, we can't go into everything about it. In the past, we did have a white paper on basic income in Ireland that died a bit of a death. So at the moment, we have a coalition government in place since 2020. There's two centre-right parties and the Greens, who I suppose could be characterised in that way to some extent as well. But the Green parties across the world are in favour of basic income, and they pushed very hard to have a pilot basic income in the programme for government in 2020. The way that emerged over time was the artist scheme. It's not what really was expected, and it doesn't really fulfill the criteria for the pilot that were described in the programme for government. So there's been a bit of fudging there on the part of the government about what the pilot actually is. So we have the artists pilot, and that is, you know, wonderful for 2,000 people. Then we have had a number of commissions, and on those commissions, we have people from the civil service and civil society serving. So just in the last year, we had a report from the Commission on Taxation and Social Welfare. Now, basic income was not in their terms of reference, although many groups, including ourselves, did make submissions advocating basic income as part of the tax and social welfare reforms. However, I think we can say on good authority from quite a number of sources that a number of very senior civil servants who served on that commission and some trade unionists have very hardened attitudes against basic income. And although it wasn't in the terms of reference, they were keen to put something in their report in order to try and kill it, basically, which was, so they came out very strongly against it. Now, some members of the commission actually wanted the whole basic income issue to be left out of the final report, but the other people who were against it held sway. So we do know, and this has been the experience of advocates over the years, that within our civil service, there are quite senior people who are opposed to basic income. We also had a report from a low pay commission. Now, the low pay commission was tasked with looking after the pilot. They rejected the notion of basic income using quite outdated data from another think tank, the Economic and Social Research Institute, but they rejected it very firmly. And then that very same think tank, the Economic and Social Research Institute, brought out a more recent report using new data, which is actually a lot more balanced and really goes into, it could be actually interpreted quite positively about basic income. So then within our opposition political parties, the biggest opposition party is called Sinn Féin. They describe themselves as on the left. There's no enthusiasm for basic income within them at all. Within some of the smaller left, centre-left parties, it's hard to know, and where they stand, they don't seem to really engage with us on it at all. I do have a sense that within Sinn Féin, there's not a lot of understanding of basic income, and we have had some positive interactions with them, but then they've kind of died a death. So it's hard to know what's going on there, but that party probably will be in government within 18 months to 2 years. And also in our political scene at the moment, we have a big housing crisis and a cost of living crisis, which really tends to take center stage and possibly works against us as we advocate basic income, because, even having a basic income is not going to help you. Well, of course it will help you, but it's not going to solve the housing crisis for us. Then within our trade unions, there's the biggest think tank for the trade unions is the Nevin Economic Research Institute, or NERI for short. Their two directors take quite a strong stance against basic income. They are very much in favor of jobs, full employment, minimum wage, benchmarking, social welfare payments, shorter working week, and so on. They advocate universal basic services, but not a basic income. Now, I think that's quite paternalistic. It doesn't, I think people need cash along with the basic services in order for flexible and sound decision making. But the trade unions and a lot of people on the left in Ireland are very suspicious of basic income. They think that it favors employers and corporations, and they're suspicious of it too because of the support that comes for basic income from big tech and neoliberal support for it. So there's work for us to do there as advocates. And indeed, two of our people, John Baker, who's here tonight, and Dave Quinn, presented a paper at the NERI conference recently in Belfast, showing how basic income can be funded, because they often trot out the funding argument as well, showing that we couldn't afford it. Then there are many other advocacy groups. We've already mentioned Social Justice Ireland, which has been steadfastly promoting basic income for a long time, and has been influential as well. There's the through our public participation network set up under the Aarhus Convention, we have an environmental pillar which has recently adopted basic income as an ask in everything, in all its submissions. And it's in their top 3 advocacy priorities for this year. There is a Wellbeing Economy Alliance as well, the We All Hub. That's an all-island or shared island initiative which promotes basic income along with universal basic services, and is consistent with the notion of donut economics, where you have a social floor and an ecological ceiling within which we exist. And that Wellbeing Economy Alliance has promoted, has actually investigated a lot the role of the arts in the wellbeing economy and how artists can help to translate ideas and disseminate ideas. And of course, one doesn't want to be instrumental in the approach to artists, saying that that's, you know, that's what artists should be doing, is translating other people's ideas. But it is a capacity that artists have. And there is a moment, I think, a kind of a parallel polis moment, as Václav Havel put it several years ago, a sort of another current of political activity, which is very concerned with the commons and with care, and that has overflowed into the artistic community too, I think. And we have for a long time had FAST, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability, has worked on that. Again, not getting a whole lot of currency. But I would like to just maybe emphasize a little bit the whole notion of the role a basic income might play in a shared island, not necessarily a united Ireland, but how we can share the island together. And the We All Hub is an all-island group. So just to come back to where I started a little bit, a lot of people in Irish society don't know what a basic income is. And when we say basic income, of course, we mean universal, unconditional, and sufficient basic income. So there is a role there for artists in translating and disseminating ideas and in sparking the imagination and in helping people to make demands. People cannot ask for what they don't know about. So it's a big pedagogical project for all of us. And when you make certain demands, it opens up spaces for other demands. So this is the work that we need to continue. Now, it would be easier, I think, to advocate for basic income for different sectors in Irish society. For example, artists, you know, you can make very clear arguments for farmers, for peat workers in the Midlands who are losing their jobs because as the peat factories are being closed down. But of course, we all know that nobody sits just in one sector. Everything is connected, and farmers, artists, board and Mona workers, their lives, the wheels of their lives are oiled by many other people. So the arguments are, of course, very strong for universal basic income, and that's one of its strengths. You know, it's not a panacea, but it does have those positive effects across society. As Reinhard pointed out, it doesn't solve every problem, but it is part of the solution for everyone. So I hope I've represented our political context reasonably accurately in that short time. There's lots more that could be said, of course, but thank you. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thanks very much, Anne, and also thanks to Reinhard for the context and the introductions as well. It's really useful to have the context and the sort of the facts and the information before we get into the kind of more personal and human side of this basic income pilot. So I'm Andy Abbott. I'm one of along with Toby Lloyd, who's also on the call, who might want to give you a wave at some point. One of the co-founders of the UBI Lab Arts lab, which is part of the within the kind of UBI Lab network. I'm going to very quickly just show you a couple of slides to give you a sense of what we do and where we've come from. So you should hopefully be able to see my screen there. So yeah, we are a group of artists and art workers that sort of came together in September 2020, all with an interest in the idea of UBI, Universal Unconditional Basic Income. And the mission that we sort of decided on for the group was to deepen and broaden the conversation about universal basic income. So we were kind of finding a lot of the kind of conversations and dialogue and discourse around UBI is very sort of based in kind of figures and facts and economics, and we were thinking, well, what as artists can we bring to kind of provide a sort of personal or human aspect to this, and sort of get a bit deeper into the human aspects of the basic income story as well. And yeah, we make it clear in our sort of presentations that whilst we're advocating for a UBI for all, we're not just interested in basic income for artists, but at the same time acknowledging that artists and art workers are part of society, and, well, as we'll find out with this pilot, provide interesting case studies that can do that sort of broadening and deepening about the conversation of UBI. So, I mean, what we do as UBI Lab Arts is we try and arrange quarterly creative practice sharing sessions. So this is where sort of artists come together and discuss and present sort of different projects that they've been working on that can maybe help with this broadening and deepening of the discussion about UBI. We publish and share info on the creative case for basic income, which is something that I've sort of written about, thinking about how basic income could actually sort of improve creativity as a whole. And we work in partnerships with other labs within the UBI Lab network and other partners to lobby for pilot schemes. So in these kind of creative practice sharing sessions, we've had people like Sarah Carrad, who sort of is an illustrator, and showed her sort of project where she's been illustrating personal anecdotes and stories about how UBI would affect people's lives. Toby Lloyd did his project, What Did You Want to Be? Between Eating and Sleeping, where he was asking questions like, what did you want to do when you were growing up, and how would you spend your time if you were able to take some time off? I did a project called Lutopia, which was a sort of a bit like a virtual reality simulator for universal basic income set in Luton, post-industrial town in England. We had Cheap Thrills, who were a sort of street theatre company that discussed their project, also sort of introducing the idea of, or starting conversations about universal basic income in the street, and the In-Kind project. And we've kind of connected with people that have been working internationally, like the Gabriella Riccio from Institute of Radical Imagination, as well as the kind of Canadian pilot schemes that happened as well in the in Canada Youth there. So yeah, our sort of, I'll stop sharing there. Our kind of mission really is to help to sort of provide some kind of more human and personal sort of context to the discussions around basic income. Think about how artists both can, well, not just illustrate the concepts, but sort of come up with projects that might help to get more people involved in those discussions as well. And really this kind of opportunity to sort of use our platform to have this discussion with artists and art workers that are involved in the pilot scheme in Ireland has been brilliant. I'm hoping that people have sort of already caught up with the first session that we ran in December, where we got quite a full kind of backstory, particularly from Shane, about the basic income pilot for the arts in Ireland and how that kind of came about and what it's doing. So the idea today really is that every 6 months we'll sort of check in with different artists that have got different relation to the pilot, whether they're receiving it or they're part of the control group or they just know people that are part of it, and just getting different perspectives and seeing how it's actually playing out in reality, this pilot, to sort of get the anecdotal and the personal kind of experiences into the conversation about this. So this is the opportunity that we see that's to be had. So I'd like to kind of, if you don't mind turning your screens on, we've got Alisha, Doody, and we've got Tadhg and Shane as well. Hi, how's it going? So yeah, for the next sort of half an hour, we'll kind of just sort of have a little bit of a round conversation. If people want to put any additional questions into the chat, we can sort of pick those up in sort of about, in about 30 minutes or so. Toby will be keeping an eye on those. And I think Reinhard mentioned it would be useful if you just put a question mark at the beginning, we can easily sort of get those as well. So yeah, I'll just start by passing over to Shane, maybe. I mean, just as a quick intro, maybe 5 minutes each, just to say who you are, what your relationship to the pilot is, and yeah, how's it going? How's it been for the last 8 months? We'll start off with with Shane, because he might be able to sort of also tell you about where he's coming from.
Hiya. Thanks, Andy, and Anne and Reinhard, and it's nice to be speaking at this again. 6 months on from the last, or 6 odd months on from the last time that we spoke, and I see that some of the same people are attending. That noise coming through the wall is my daughter who's having a bath next door, so that might just go on for another 5 minutes or so. My practice as a visual artist, I make artworks mostly installation based, mostly using or thinking about critical technologies. And I also perform artistic research in collectives and collaborative organizations. I run artistic projects as well with other artists, and have recently as in last September, opened a space for collaborative artistic research in the town that I'm living in, Manorhampton, in County Leitrim. And my position on the basic income, I applied, as many artists did, when the call came out last year. I was not selected for the basic income, the artist basic income. I was selected though to be part of the control group, which means that once every 6 months I have to fill out a form that gives a bit of an update on how it has been not receiving the basic income, essentially. As another friend of mine who also didn't receive, but I was also from the control group, commented when this all came out about first, really what we should be doing is writing, on this week I was €325 short of such and such a thing, and just continues to do that. But actually the forums are quite interesting, and it's something maybe I'll talk to you a little bit later on. It's probably something Tadhg and Alisha would also speak to, because the specific pieces of information that are being asked for, at least as part of the control group, are kind of, I mean, they've kind of sparked certain things in me, because you can see maybe a track of what the study and what they themselves are seeking and are looking for. But yeah, so in return for being part of the control group, I get 2 payments of €325 in each of the 3 years that this goes on, so €650 across the 12 months. And then that's to kind of counter the amount of time spent reading the forms and so on that come out. I think that's enough of a kind of an overall introduction. Website link and everything is there, but I'm sure the discussion will kind of bring out a lot more of what we want to talk about now. Okay.
Thanks, Shane. And yeah, I'll pass just the mic, the digital mic, over to Alisha to introduce herself and say what her relationship to the pilot is.
Sure, thanks, Andy, and thanks to everyone for organising this. It's actually lovely to be in a room with people talking about it, because there's I feel still an element of secrecy around it. Okay, so I'm a visual artist with a social engaged practice. So similarly to Shane, I work in kind of collectives and then have a solo practice as well. I applied and was deemed eligible, but not selected initially for the pilot. And then in the weeks afterwards, just over 20 people who would have initially been deemed eligible had maybe emigrated or joined education and were no longer eligible. So their places became available. And a second lottery occurred and my name was pulled. So I didn't get it, and then I did. And I think, yeah, similarly to Shane, it's been an interesting couple of months, and probably more reflection on time spent and what it exactly is the study that they're doing, and how how I'm filling out the answers, how I'm spending my time, how I'm being evaluated. It's definitely made me a little bit more introspective around, what exactly, is down on paper about what it is that I do. I also teach full time. So, I'm in an interesting position, because not all of my, my week is available for me to continue my arts practice, which is, what is essentially being evaluated as well. So yeah, I definitely would be interested in continuing this discussion there around the forms and the evaluation side of things, particularly after the first round of having to submit that paperwork to them. But yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Alisha. That's a great intro. Thanks very much. And I'll pass over to our new guest, Tadhg, because he wasn't part of our conversation last time. But yeah, you want to say a little bit about yourself and your practice and what your relationship to the pilot is, Tadhg?
Howie, my name is Tadhg Cuirrín. I'm an artist based in Galway in the west of Ireland. And yeah, I was supposed to join you, I think, for the initial meeting in December, but I was double booked. So it is nice to be here and to have watched the old video as well. So I guess, yeah, I work in a variety of media, but in recent years have mostly been painting. I have a history of working in different artist-run spaces in Ireland. I am in receipt of the basic income, and I guess for a lot of the last few months, it kind of felt like my life wasn't that different, in the sense that I was quite busy. I had like a solo exhibition in March, and I had a few other kind of things over the winter. So I was kind of in that mode of just working, doing things, you know, ticking off A, B, C, and meeting deadlines and getting things done in that regard. And so I kind of budgeted money and time towards that. So the basic income, that was kind of being put over there. And I guess now in the last 2 months or so, I've been less busy. So there's been more time to ruminate, to reflect, to look out the window, think. About the scheme, about how it can affect my life as an artist, but also I guess my life more generally, what it means to have that much coming in for the next, whatever it is now, 2.5 years, and what you can do with that, and how you can now think about your practice. And so, yeah, and feeding into that, I guess, as well, and what the others have touched on as well, about data collection and about the relatively rounded view that they had, or the relatively rounded approach that they have taken in asking for different kind of indicators. And it's interesting to kind of stop and think about what it is you actually do in a week, how you spend your time. You know, you think you're very busy doing X, Y, and Z, and then you tot it up, and you're spending your time in different places than you would have thought, which was interesting.
That's great, Tadhg. Thank you. So, I mean, you're leading quite nicely into the sort of, I guess, the bit of the conversation that I'm interested in, especially this, 8 months into the pilot, or 6 months since we last spoke here, which is, yeah, how is it affecting your creative practice, or kind of the discussions that you're having? You've mentioned there, Tadhg, that, yeah, so you're starting to realise that you've got a little bit more time to reflect, but also with that, there's some additional admin that's coming in as well. But Alisha, I wondered, how have you sort of found, has it affected your practice or the way that you're making work in any way?
That was a really interesting question for me, actually, because I think, you know, what Tadhg said is right. You know, we got it, but we all, you know, artists are planning months ahead all the time anyway. You know, you've got projects, you've applied for funding and all of that, or the rest of that. But I've felt a certain amount of pressure, actually, a pressure to perform, or a pressure to do something with my time. You know, there are certain categories in the ways that the questions are being asked. You know, how much time have you spent making work? How much time have you spent researching? And I felt pressured to have had so many hours in each of those, even though I've been working full time as well. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's affected me, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily all positive. I think I've felt more stress and pressure to perform.
Interesting. So yeah, that you feel like there's a sort of, well, not even an implied, a fairly explicit kind of expectation to be more productive, or to at least be able to account for your time through being a recipient of the.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that there was a kind of a budgeting tool provided to us, which is basically a spreadsheet for your hour breakdown per day. And like Tadhg said, once you start filling out that form, you start to realize where you're really spending your time, and then, you know, how much leisure time am I allowed to have every day? You know, what is a legitimate use of my time here? You know, is it going to be seen negatively if I don't do housework every day? Or, you know, you do tend to look inward a lot, or I did anyway, when I was filling out those daily routines, or at the end of the week filling out where I spent my time, and going, geez, I didn't spend that much time making any work this week. I haven't spoken to anyone about my work this week. And in a week-to-week basis, it has, you know, it's kind of sped up what I feel like I should be doing instead of slowing me down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how about for you, Shane? Because I suppose you're kind of on the, you know, you're blessed with not having the pressure to do the extra productivity as being part of the control group. But I mean, have you noticed a difference in the kind of the people around you that are, or the overall kind of art scene in the place that you're in, from knowing that this money's coming in?
Yeah, there are a couple of things to talk to on that, and I might touch on one and then bring it back up as another question, because I think Tadhg might like to answer this point before I move on. But it's I think something that Alisha was saying there was kind of interesting, was that, like, that breakdown of time thing. There's obviously that idea that, like, you know, how much leisure time or how much etc. But there's also the categorizations of those time sections I find kind of like very difficult to follow sometimes as well, because I'm not sure what I identify as leisure time. I'm not sure what I mean, I know what I identify as sleeping time, because that's one of the things, but like that's a kind of an obvious one. But like, how do you identify something like housework or care work, and how do you break those things up if they overlap with something else, like care work and leisure time? You know, if I'm playing in the back garden with my daughter, is that like care work or leisure time, or is it both? And those kind of like breakups can be a little bit difficult to put down. And they also, and this maybe is something that Alisha kind of alluded to there as well, there is, and it's something I joked about when I said about, like, you know, putting down that I was 325 euros short every week when filling out these forms. But I think it's a real genuine thing for me filling out the form, is I'm also trying to think ahead of the form and go, well, what, like, I don't want to write something down that they can statistically analyze and then go, oh, well, this thing is pointless. So I'm kind of almost second guessing the form itself, which is a silly thing to do anyway. I know that this isn't how social science should work, but I think that that's also what we all tend to do anyway, if we're being honest. Like, and I'm sure that there's something that Alisha, you kind of said there, and I wonder whether, and Tadhg might also answer to this, I wonder whether, when you're saying about the pressure to feel like you're always busy, is that as much coming from the form and the scheme and so on, or is it coming as much from the fact that you know that there are other artists who didn't get it, and that you feel sort of responsible for, like, them not getting it and you having it? Because you kind of said something like that in December, Alisha, and maybe I'd be interested to hear your own thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the pressure there to make it worth it, you know, for the data to show that it, you know, it fundamentally did good. And look at how well all of the artists that received it did. And as the opposite is also true, like you're saying, all the artists that didn't receive it weren't able to do X, Y, and Z thing. And being very aware that you're in a data collection research model and what you're putting down. But totally, Shane, what you're saying there as well about where you're categorizing your time. Like, is this leisure time or care work or household work? Or it was kind of, some days it's hard to break that apart. And put yourself into lots of little boxes. And am I making work even though I've just been in conversations with people all day, or am I researching? Like, which is that? Because it's collaborative work, you know. So there are days and weeks where it's sticky and messy, for sure. Maybe Tadhg, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think as artists, there's always a kind of a pressure to perform. I mean, it is broadly a public-facing role, you know. Whether you make paintings or you sing on a stage, there is a pressure to perform. So in that sense, I don't know if there's a big change for me. And also as well, I guess one is in the habit maybe of pressuring yourself to always be going. You know, the artist is the kind of the quintessential self-starter, the neoliberal kind of the you know, get up and go and kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps in a way in this last couple of decades, that you know, you find the work, you do the jobs, you get it done. Speaking more broadly, I guess, about a kind of a pressure to do something to make success out of it. I mean, I guess what does success look like? What is it? And it will be different for different people. And I've thought about that. I mean, success at the end of this scheme could be artistic, but it could be other things as well, I guess. It could be, yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I think Shane, you spoke about before in the last talk about things that you could do and things that you couldn't do depending on the money you had, and they weren't artistic things, they were life things. So yeah, I mean, maybe success is artistic, is professional, or maybe success would be ticking off a few life boxes there, you know, things that you've wanted to get done, you know. So I mean, yeah, and I guess talking about time and how you quantify the time you spend, both in your personal life and in your professional life, it kind of feeds into a much bigger question about like what is an artist? What does an artist do? Like, how does an artist make art? Which I always find to be like a really convoluted question. I get really confused when I finish one big body of work and I'm kind of in between before I start onto something else. It's like, what do I do? I come in, I sit in the studio, and I kind of like, I was like, what am I supposed to do? Do I read a book? Do I draw a picture? Do I talk to somebody? I don't know. Baffles me.
So it sounds from the three of you that, yeah, obviously, well, within the sort of 8 months, yeah, it's forcing you or encouraging you to kind of start to think about the use of your time differently in the categories that you might sort of, yeah, split that time into, whether it's sort of leisure or productivity or work, or art or life. And of course, yeah, I think as we're getting a few comments as well there, I suppose the thing that a universe-based income can do, as well as kind of a properly embedded or kind of applied practice, is to break those barriers down. Whereas what's happening through this pilot in this stage at the moment is to start to kind of make some of those distinctions more obvious. I was just wondering a bit about so this it's really good to get this in terms of how it's affecting you personally and the way that you're thinking about your own sort of practice. But what about the sort of discussions that are happening around you within your sort of either immediate artistic community or creative community, or the how's it sort of sunk in with people? I think you mentioned, Alisha, at the beginning there, that you feel there's still a bit of secrecy around it, and maybe not an open discussion that's happening. But so what's the discourse?
Well, I'll separate the online space from the real life space, because I'm not really online a lot at the moment, so I don't really know if there's a huge amount of discussion still happening about it there. But you know, I think Anne said it, you know, people just don't understand. You know, if I tell people in my personal life that aren't involved in the arts sector, they have no awareness of what it is or what it means, or you know, what it entails, what its purpose is. You know, it is very unknown, I think, from just those few conversations that I've had around it. But I am finding that artists that I'm connecting with on work or projects, or even just having discussions with, you know, there's an openness now to say, oh, I'm actually getting that. Or so I found a lot more people that have, just from general kind of conversations. Generally speaking, actually, interestingly, Shane, the conversation will only emerge if somebody has received it, not if they applied and didn't get it. So there is still, there's a disparity in who's talking about it, you know what I mean? But I think we definitely need to work on the educational side of it. So, I was really pleased to see the work that you were doing there, Andy, with all the different projects that are emerging, because I think, I'm definitely an advocate for it. As much as I'm talking about the negative feelings around being part of the pilot study, I think we need to use this as a moment for sure to educate people on what the benefits can be for everyone,
It's an interesting point that you made there, Alisha, that like people who have received are the ones having that conversation as well. I definitely would find that as well in circles here. There are only a couple of people that I know who've received it, and I have had that conversation with them, and they brought it up, and I didn't know, and then I did, but that's okay. That was what it was, and it wasn't a kind of I got it. Did you get it? It just came up in conversation. But by and large, with the colleagues that I'm working with, actually, I'd forgotten that there even was a scheme running almost. Like, if it wasn't for the fact that I was going to speak at this thing, it had kind of gone out of my head completely, because it's just, I've moved on. I have to apply for other things. I still need to have an income. I still need to, make sure that rent is paid next month and the month afterwards. And I'm not thinking about the basic income. It has actually gone completely. And it was actually coming up to this, I started thinking, what am I going to talk about because actually I haven't been thinking about this. But even as kind of these things are flowing out, I think the thinking is actually there. Sometimes it does pop up in kind of more offbeat sort of ways. There was when the Arts Council of Ireland have a couple of deadlines for big funding calls for individual artists, one in January and one in June. And those calls for the Agility Award and for the Bursary Award, which would be the ones that are most kind of focused for individual artists, the first time that came around this year in January, it was the highest number of applications they'd ever had. And one of the conversations that we had before, I think something even came up in December, we were talking about maybe when a lot of people are receiving a basic income, less people will apply for these funds. Mm-hmm. But actually what's happened is more people, now I'm taking cause and effect, and I don't know, there could be lots of reasons why more people have applied, but certainly with whatever amount of visual artists or whatever amount of artists receiving this basic income, you would have to think that some part of them receiving that must have had some influence on the increase in applications. And that would make me ask the question, is it because those people were so much kind of under the cosh with something else, a full-time job or something like that they never even had the time to apply for the funding, mm-hmm. which is one of the main things that kind of keeps a lot of artists afloat. It's awful that it is, but that's the way it is. So that was that time, that conversation came up a lot because people were talking a lot about how come there was an increase, and we kind of thought that maybe with the basic income there'd be a decrease. But anyway, that was one thing. And then there's the other thing, as Alisha said, that the total misunderstanding. I did meet somebody, he was quite drunk, but he was somebody I know since I was a child, but he just wandered off a train one day, and we ran into each other and we were chatting for a little while, and he was told me he's gone into performing arts, and the next thing he goes, yeah, and the artist dole is coming, and there's a lot of that kind of thought as well, where it's oh, this is for artists, and it's going to be specifically for artists, and it's going to expand for artists, and it's not really thinking about the universal side. And that I actually met Anne since the last time we spoke. When we met, she did actually make that point that there is a real kind of lack of understanding in general around the world, but certainly around here. And I think that the longer these conversations are kind of being had here, the more I'm realizing that there is a misunderstanding. I don't know whether or not there's a very easy bridge to cross. I am interested in that idea though of art about UBI, as well as artists getting UBI. I think art about UBI is also quite there's something there. There's definitely something that can be of value.
Thanks, Shane. And Tadhg, you're in a different bit of the country as well, or what's the kind of conversation been like with people around you or the general public?
I was trying to think of that, all right, because I haven't, it doesn't come up that much, which I think the other two alluded to. Amongst friends and family, it's actually been generally a kind of a very positive response, and a lot of them did have some awareness of it, or one or two even asked me, was I getting that artist dole, as they refer to it there. Now that might just be the specifics of my own social circle, I guess. And then amongst artists, I know quite a lot of artists who got it. Oddly enough, I know Shane said you too, I think, but I know a decent amount. And then amongst those who didn't get it, I suppose the response is more muted. But I don't know. Artists don't often talk about money, but when they do start talking about money, they really talk about money, I think, you know. So everyone's like trying to figure out how they're piecing it together, you know. And so, but yeah, what Shane was saying about, or what you've been doing as well about making art about basic income. It's something I was thinking of in the last few days, and like, what would that look like, I guess. And I guess I could see kind of delving into that a bit, but yeah.
So I mean, that's what. Go on, Alisha.
I was just going to come back to something Shane was saying there, you know, about the cause and effect. Maybe not necessarily, there's no factual basis for it around the application process and going for funding and stuff. And I actually totally agree with you. I think, you know, the fundamental time that it takes to actually write an application, but then also think through where you're at in terms of preparing an application, you know, the formality of it, but also the reflection it requires for you to put down on paper where you've been and where you want to get to. Like, those are really, they underline massively that process of application through the Arts Council, I think, anyway. So I think people that have been in receipt of it have that time, maybe, potentially. But then also I'm wondering if that's related to the idea that people are talking about getting it because there's a certain kind of, like, I was deemed eligible, you know, I got it. Like that there's a respect thing, you know. The government have said I'm an artist, so I'm actually an artist. Do you know, like, are people able to say it out loud now because they're starting to come around, and there's a confidence from it as well, you know, that I don't know that there's, yeah. Anyway, that's just off the top of my head. I don't know.
No, that's useful to sort of, yeah, to think about. And I suppose, yeah, what I want to pick up on between the three of you really is this another sort of, well, conversation that's happening or pressure that seems to be emerging is to sort of, yeah, to be answering this idea that it's, well, that you're on the artist dole, or that it's for artists. But I think between the three of you, you're all interested in, yeah, a broader, a universal basic income, advocating for that. So how do you feel, is it opening those conversations up? How do you feel the kind of relationship between the artists being the first to get it and kind of, but are you feeling the need to kind of qualify your position when you're talking to people and say that you do want it for everyone, and is it helpful?
Yeah, well, look, for me personally, when I've talked about it with anyone that's not within the art sector, so mostly family and friends that are kind of unrelated to my arts practice, it has very much been a case for universal basic income that is generally met with a lack of understanding or sort of an argument against. You know, it's kind of back to what Anne was saying about the general kind of the air that you're getting around, we're having those conversations. So I think that there is something beginning to change. And look, let's not get it wrong, Ireland has changed a lot in the last 30 plus years, a lot, and it's happened off the back of those conversations happening. So I think that there is something there to even just the pilot groups and the control groups having a start to those conversations, and everything that's come with the Basic Income Ireland group and their predecessors as well, you know. So there is something there, but I think there's a lot of work to do.
Thanks, Alisha. So, I mean, we're going to kind of start to move on to some of the questions that are coming in through the chat, and hopefully Toby will have sort of gathered a few of those together. So just while he's sort of putting some of those into a form that you can sort of put to you, I just wanted to sort of ask a little additional question to you. More about, yeah, maybe, so I mean, Alisha, you sort of mentioned this as well. It's like you were deemed eligible to be an artist, and it's allowed you to sort of say that you're an artist and kind of vocalize that. I mean, do you feel sort of speculatively that the kind of something like a basic income for the arts could also diversify who can be an artist and who can sort of take part? Are you sort of feeling like there's potential for more people to become artists through a scheme like this?
I think there's potential there. There was a really interesting question I spotted in the chat earlier, actually, that kind of connects to that, which was, did you feel pressured to make more commercial work? And my personal answer was no. Like, that wasn't where I felt my practice was. But I do, you know, I've met artists since that didn't get it, or that are kind of, you know, like the whole process of applying for funding is a whole area that you know, you need education on to even be able to enter into the application process and know how to the Arts Council works and stuff. So I think, yes, absolutely. You're talking about anyone with a learning disability, or, you know, even aside from artists that are working, you know, out in commercial areas that aren't considered within this kind of world of fine arts or whatever. You know, there's just lots of little sectors where people could classify themselves as artists that they aren't right now, because there is a sort of a small umbrella that doesn't hold everyone in it, you know. I don't know. Is that mad?
Which was also part of the problem with the application process. And yeah, sorry. I think we mentioned that the last time, or Rachel mentioned that the last time, that there was this problem with the application process, that you had to qualify what type of an artist you were. And some people who were, particularly like people who would fall under a category or an umbrella as like craft workers or craftsmen, didn't qualify in a lot of cases to be part of this this pilot scheme, which was like also a little bit strange to me anyway, because I thought that conversation had moved on a long time ago. But this is then this is whoever pitched the original trial, I suppose. Like, you know, this goes back to conversations that were had in another context maybe. There was something. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Tadhg?
I was just going to say it kind of feeds into a broader conversation about like what is an artist and what an artist does, and, you know, what are people's motivations to be an artist these days, you know. And I guess alongside that, what is the future of this scheme in Ireland? What happens in 2.5 years? Is it being kind of developed? Is it being looked at as an alternative way of funding the arts in Ireland? Is that a good thing? I'm skeptical of the Conservative government's motivations in introducing this scheme. And somebody had a line in an article about the Irish context, I guess, about like, is it a case of kind of throwing scraps to precarious workers to kind of see what is the least that can be thrown to keep the wheels moving? And that's the negative take, I guess, on a basic income, and that's kind of that I guess that's fit into my caution around the topic in places. But obviously Reinhard and others have touched on and have gone into the case for it in a convincing manner. But yeah, I mean, it would be interesting then as a funding model in Ireland. I mean, what happens if it was rolled out more broadly as the way that the arts is funded in Ireland? I mean, would people flock to Ireland? Would artists from around Europe flock to Ireland? Would that be a good thing? What happened? Like, lots of artists. Yeah, I don't know. I guess you know, there's money in the art sector in Ireland in a way that there wasn't 10 or 15 years ago, but there isn't necessarily better art and better opportunities in a way. Like, a lot of interesting artists run spaces have closed down over the years, and kind of mostly the bigger spaces have managed to stick around, and like a lot of weird art is gone. There's a lot of paintings, good paintings, but like a lot of the weird stuff is hard to find. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, that's a very interesting area for me, Tadhg, I think, to sort of be thinking about, well, how can something like this affect a practice? Because I guess from, you know, where it's coming from is the idea that this kind of seed money will help bolster the creative industries, and kind of it's a way of, as you say, sort of, whereas actually, yeah, from I guess my perspective, a lot of other artists, it's kind of like, yeah, if you're giving that sort of floor to creativity for everyone to do things, then it diversifies what creativity is, and weirder stuff is allowed to sort of to emerge from that. So it's kind of, yeah, that's a really interesting point to come back to. I'm going to sort of ask a question later just about sort of how useful these sort of conversations are, and whether they're happening sort of outside of this forum, and what the desire is for you as well. But before we get into that, Toby, have you managed to sort of scour anything from the chat, and would you like to put anything from the audience to the artists?
So I mean, yeah, quite a few points coming through. I mean, a few sort of specific questions, and Alisha, you've already addressed one of those, I guess. But I guess the thing which really struck me in terms of the conversation, but also the themes which were coming through in the comments, was kind of like the, you know, why do you as artists feel like you have to justify the money you're, you know, earning through this thing? And I guess, you know, for me, my question sort of coming off that would be, do you think for other sectors, let's say, for example, farmers, because, you know, farming, basic income for farmers, as mentioned earlier on, do you think they would feel the same kind of pressure to produce more food or diversify food in the same way that you're feeling that? And is that, I mean, you know, I guess because what you were saying, Alisha, about your conversations with your families and friends, about just the lack of understanding. I mean, I think, is it just because art and making art or being an arts worker is just, there's a big misunderstanding about what that actually involves, I think. And so yeah, just to sort of, you know, I guess like the questions are coming through just on those kind of things about like what's the value of art and that kind of thing. And if it's meant to be a universal basic income, it's given to you as a basic right, isn't it? So
I think the pressure is not necessarily because it's a basic income. I think the pressure is knowing that it's a pilot, and there will be decisions made off the back of whatever research or data we input into the research. That's where the pressure is. It's not knowing how it's going to be interpreted and what the motivations are of the people who are interpreting the data. So you know, I thought that I want to skew the data. You know, Shane was talking about putting in, you know, I didn't have enough money for this and that and the other, but it feels a little bit like, should I be putting in that I worked more? Because then that looks like I've gotten money, so I've been really productive. You know, it's sort of like a psychological thing that you're concerned with the implications of what it is that you're going to be putting in terms of data. So I find, you know, having the security of that income for sure isn't the thing that's making me feel pressured. I think it's the pilot itself, the fact that it's part of a pilot is the thing that's making me feel pressured.
I suppose, as you're saying, it's like concerned with the implications of what would happen if you don't use it productively.
Yeah.
Like, will they pull a possible future plan or something like that? Like, and you feel like you're kind of one of them, because it
was
is.
That my fault?
Yeah. There's another thing that's kind of like almost linked to that, but not quite, that's on the forum though, that I did find really interesting as it came up, because they ask a lot about your mental health. A lot of the questions come around to mental health, and have you suffered from any like increase in anxiety or any increase in depression over the last X amount of time since like getting or not getting it. And that I actually do think has value, or could potentially have value. But one of the things that really hit me or struck me when filling that out was that I realized that over that period of time I had, and then I started to wonder, was that related to this? Like, you know, was that actually something that had been kind of like brought on or triggered by not having the security of, and that these things could kind of like lie more subtly or more underneath, like what like what's happening to, and that kind of like, so I know that's a little bit of a deviation from the kind of the pressure to perform, but there's also the kind of something about the form answering that makes you realize some kind of truths that are maybe like hovering or like trickling away there as well, like that are relevant to yourself, like, you know, to like very, very personal things.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And I mean, look, to be fair, I don't want I think there's skepticism there. I'll have to be honest about that. I have a certain amount of skepticism about how the data is going to be interpreted. So, you know, I think that me as a person, that is part of why I feel the way that I feel about this. I don't think everyone is going to have the same feelings that I have about it. But I do see what you're saying, Shane, that, you know, that there are questions there that make you feel comforted, that they're not just there to get, you know, it's not just about the amount that you're working, and it's not just about, you know, how much you're spending on your practice and how much you're spending on your rent and all of the rest of the stuff, you know. And there's a lovely box at the end that you can put in as much information as you want, so long as you don't identify yourself, that tells them about how you feel about participating in it. And, you know, I think that, you know, from there was a support session, which I didn't attend in person, but I did watch back. I just happened to be working, so I couldn't. And it was massively supportful, actually. It felt really good to get to know the people that were interested in the data, and it felt good to hear why they had, you know, presented the questions in the ways that they had. I don't know if anyone that's involved in UBI actually knows that video is there on YouTube somewhere. There is a video.
When you say support session, this was this was sent out to all participants, just to kind of give like a wee bit of context, that it was a support session for anybody who had any questions, but also who was struggling throughout this. And they sent around something else, which was like I can't remember, was it like a mental health support?
Links to various mental health resources and supports that were available. I could probably find those and forward them on if those were of interest to others. Or if they had
and
not been
that
seen.
definitely satiated some of my nerves, to be honest with you, getting that level of detail directly from the people involved in the survey, the research piece, you know. So I don't want to leave this meeting tonight with everyone thinking that we're all skeptical of what the government's motives are for this. You know, I genuinely think that the people that are undertaking this level of research have positive intentions, you know, that they're there to take from it what they get, but it's just not knowing what it exactly is going to be positive to put into the bits of research.
Yeah. And I share your skepticism, Alisha, as well, actually, on that. But I don't know what the motivation is. The question has just come through there, like how is the format or content decided? And I think, I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody here might know, but I know that I don't know. And I think that's the context for that, like, was the sort of like stuff behind closed doors before any of this stuff. But I would say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tadhg.
I wasn't going to say anything else.
Oh no, I was just going to say Reinhard has like some quite a bit of understanding and experience with how trials are put together, and maybe has a little bit more context or a little bit more understanding. Maybe you could speak to that.
And just on Martin's question there, the YouTube video, I wouldn't have a link for it straight away now, because I'd have to go into the portal that we have to fill out our surveys in, and it's not going to be super quick to get that out, but I'm sure if we can share it, we will. If it's there to be shared, you know.
I mean, I was just asked, I mean, can you, I mean, there are participatory research trials where the participants are actually involved in the design of the research, but it's clear that in this case, this was not done. So it was done by some experts who decided what question should be put into this questionnaire. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I believe so. And there was an attempt during that session to clarify, you know, me and Shane talked about not being, you know, not knowing where to categorize yourself sometimes, you know, in terms of the data. And then, you know, in that session, they did try to clarify some of the gray areas that people, from an FAQs sort of point of view, you know, this is what we mean when we've asked this, and this is what we mean when we've asked that kind of thing. So I'm sure that would be useful for some people who are the experts. I'm not sure, actually, you know.
I think even also as we continue to speak, there's one thing that sort of seems relevant in kind of a lot of the questions, but also in a lot of the things that we're saying, is that like actually there are a lot of shortcomings to a trial. And I think we did also say this the last time that we spoke, to a trial of basic income. If you're talking about universal basic income, which is really what like the overall conversation is supposed to be about, universal basic income is not what a trial is, and it can't prove very much. A trial can't prove a huge amount because it is within a very narrow field, and it's being trialed here in this case with artists. But it could have been, as like Toby was reading out the question, it could have been with somebody else. It could have been with farmers. And what would have been different had that been the case? I would say you'd still have very limited results because you're still dealing with like something that you consider a sector. Like, and some artists are also farmers, or some farmers are also doctors, and so you don't all those the things that Anne was saying, the kind of like the bleeding edge things that don't really differentiate people from one another. They're very difficult to kind of like to separate out when you're doing something like a trial or doing something like this. To trial a universal basic income, on the other hand, would be literally to give everybody a universal basic income and to trial that and to see what the end result of that would be. But I think that's something that hasn't really been spoken about rolling out. But I do notice the more that like we have this conversation, and the more that like actually just even opening this up and looking at the questions that are coming in, the more I'm starting to see that like the questions that are being asked and the thing that this is, they're not necessarily always the same thing either, because like we can't answer what universal basic income could possibly be off the back of a trial on 2,000 people. That won't be, not even we ourselves, but we as in like anybody who's involved in this in any way, like, you know, even include the people who would be the experts who are setting the questions, or the people who are running the scheme in some way.
I mean, that's a good point, Shane, as well, because I think another question, or more of a comment really from Shane, was about you know, his frustration, but the trial, as Anne was stating, was there was so much sort of resistance to it even coming about, and how it almost felt like it was being sabotaged. And I guess one thing he was saying is that it felt there was not much resistance, or not as much support from the arts community or the arts institutions who were involved in the initial conversations. I mean, I know that I imagine none of you represent those institutions or bodies, so wouldn't actually be able to answer Shane's comment. And I think, but that would be something I think really useful to follow up in a future session, is sort of how these trials are set about and everything. And I guess one of the issues we have really is that, you know, there is so much resistance to doing trials for ideological reasons. But like everyone's saying, that even in a trial like this, which, you know, it's fantastic, but it's even come to light. I mean, it's fantastic that people are receiving it. But, you know, as Sean says, there'll be fantastic results, but will that actually change anyone's minds? You know, will the experts' minds change at the end of this? You know, I'm sure we'll have some great data showing that all of you have, you know, I guess that's the part of the issue as well, isn't it? Like Alisha, you were saying, it's just that thing of, actually, it's not going to make you make more work. It probably just releases the pressure, which enables you to be a happier, healthier person. You might not necessarily make more artwork out of it, but like, actually life is going to be easier and better for you.
Yeah, I mean, look, on a totally personal level, I went through an eviction process in the last couple of months, and I've had to move back into my parents' house. And I'll tell you, it definitely softened that blow to have that cushion there. And to know that that situation is one that I can change, and I can change it quite quickly if I need to. So, you know, take away all of the pilot research and data collection and the rest of it, it for sure having a big impact on my personal life and my day-to-day. Yeah, massive.
Great. So, I mean, we are coming to the last 10 minutes or so, and I have been trying to keep an eye. If anyone's question has been missed, please could you repost it, because I'm doing my best to sort of multitask here. But yeah, I think like there's I mean, are there any other final comments or questions from people in the audience, or anything which we'd like to raise before we sort of start coming to a close?
There was one question actually, Toby, and I know the time is pushing on, just in this selection of questions that you had sent to us to consider before we came into the conversation, which was, would it be worthwhile trying to put together a meet for the people that have been involved in the pilot, or maybe something else similar to that kind of? And I think it actually would be really great, Shane, Tadhg, if we could get together with people that we already know are involved in it to some capacity, and find out if there's something that we can do to help the movement towards UBI as participants in the pilot. What have we learned from the inside and the outside of it that we can actually utilize? Like you mentioned, being interested in making some work, but, you know, let's see if that's actually something that we could legitimately get a group together and see what comes of that initial meeting on Zoom, and if people have an interest in doing something, you know.
And I think there's always a benefit to artists getting together and seeing what comes of it. I think there's always some benefit to that. I mean, I guess one point that I'd seen mentioned somewhere else about artists who are in receipt of a basic income are maybe in a position where they're better able to kind of show solidarity to other artists who might be, you know, because paying conditions and contracts and so on in the art sector are generally pretty poor. And, you know, these kind of relationships with different galleries and institutions can be fairly one-sided. So, you know, if you have that kind of safety net of a basic income, you can maybe kind of advocate more broadly for other artists as well. That you have that safety net that you can kind of be kind of like, well, I don't need to put up with this, and frankly, other artists shouldn't have to put up with this either. So that's one way that maybe it could have a broader impact. But anyways,
yeah, that is a good point. And it would be like, I mean, it's definitely something. I think that like most people would be kind of open to the conversation, and to like, you know, reciprocal to that, even if they were not involved or if they're not in receipt. And I don't actually just think artists. I actually think that could be something that could go much further than like just within artists. Although I think like as a community that would understand maybe more the basic income, like to begin with artists. It's funny, my immediate knee jerk actually when you were saying, Alisha, that like, oh, you could. We could get together and it'd be brilliant to have like, you know, a point of conversation. Like I was immediately going, yeah, but like time and like, you know, I mean the cost of time and I don't know if I can, because like right now I'm chasing like 3 different contracts and I don't have any. Like it has been a very hard year this year as well. But I mean that's the way it is in art. Full stop. Like, you know, you can have good years and bad years. But like yeah, and so it did like that's no. I'm just saying that this is the knee jerk, and then I was kind of like, oh, actually that's exactly it again. If I had,
I know, but it is, you know, that it is. You're absolutely spot on. It's the nature of it, and it goes to what Tadhg was saying as well. You know, it is where we're at. You know, we have to find a way to support each other and move towards supporting the wider movement. You know what I mean? Like, how can we pull each other together and support each other while we can try and further this so that we have it for everyone?
Yeah, those are excellent points. I think, yeah, your point there, Shane, about this lack of time being the real thing for everyone, isn't it? And yeah, that's a useful segue into the closing remarks then as well. But before I hand over to, I think it's Reinhard who's doing this. But Andrea has put a shout out because she's running an event in Hungary for Hungarian artists, and is putting a shout out for anyone who wants to be involved in that. Also, Andrea, if you get in touch with us, we can promote the event. It would be really great to share it out on our networks as well. You know, it'd be great to hear how life is for Hungarian artists, and yeah, whether a basic income would help them too. But yeah, I think it's on Sean's point as well, that I think, you know, all artists, well, at least UBI Lab Arts are advocating for a universal basic income, which is universal for everyone in society. And like Andy said, so more people can become artists or, you know, explore their creativity. But with all that, thank you very much, everyone. And I'll hand over to Reinhard for the closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I mean, I think this was a very interesting and animated discussion. I think it will be very difficult to summarize it in 1 or 2 minutes. I would like to sort of just say, I mean, it shows exactly how difficult it is to conduct sort of a trial, even it's called a pilot study, but to conduct something like that with people being involved and thanking people and the consequences. So, I mean, there is a sort of concept of realist evaluation, which exactly says that you, I mean, people, once you become involved in a trial, be it in a control group or be it as an active participant, I mean, this all affects you and makes you reflect about the trial, and in itself changes your viewpoint about things. So it's not sort of like, as I always say, being a medical person, like a trial about some sort of medical treatment, medicine. So I think it was a very, very interesting discussion and important to understand that trial is not easy to conduct and may not actually be the answer, because it is always be limited to a few people. So, and a real universal basic income would be very different. And before I close, I would just like to point out there is in the chat an announcement that Basic Income Ireland will conduct an event in November exactly about this trial, and everybody is sort of welcome to join, and also about funding of basic income. It will be in Dublin, it's in the chat, and maybe hybrid. And also there is the UBI Lab network offers the opportunity to join as a member. Again, the link is in the chat. And finally, would also like to point out that next week we will have another event about how to fund basic income, because this is one of the big issues where a lot of opposition is sort of created, because people feel that it's a good idea, but actually it is difficult to fund, and therefore it may not be the solution. So if you are interested in this idea of funding and different options, here in the chat is one which is about sovereign money, but there are many other ideas, suggestions how it can be funded. Personally, I always say basic income funding is just a redistribution of money in society. So it shouldn't be a problem if we have the public and political will, in contrast to funding for education or funding for health services, where the money which has to be collected is actually spent and therefore not available for other activities. It it is spent, the resources are used. So but basic income is a funding where you redistribute money in society. So it is not spent, it's just given to a certain group or to everybody. So to have a basic certain foundation for her or his life. And therefore it should be possible if society and is willing to do it. And with these words, I would like to conclude and say thank you for this really important discussion, raising issues of trials. And yes, this conversation, this event will be recorded, has been recorded, and will be made available on the YouTube channel of the UBI Lab Arts. So thanks everybody, have a good evening, and I hope it made you become a supporter of basic income for everybody, not just for artists, for everybody to be creative and sort of a member of society who feels included and able to do whatever people feel they want to do for a good life. So thank you and a good evening. Bye-bye.